Welcome to the Meet the Thriller Author podcast. I am your host, Alan Peterson, and you're listening to episode number 9. I'm going to be talking with J. David Corr, author and podcaster. Dave, thank you for coming on the show. Can you please kick things off here by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I live in Ohio, twice divorced. I have 3 kids, 2 grandkids. I've been writing since high school, and publishing off and on since high school, but I've only really started focusing on writing the last couple of years, ever since Kindle made it really easy. I also blog, review other people's books, focusing a lot on the indie movement ever since I first found out about it a couple of years ago.
And are you usually focusing on thrillers, or is that all type of genres?
I have a broad definition of thriller, where I basically anything that has a suspense attitude towards it. My personal preference is towards mysteries and noir, but in my blog and on my podcast, I have people that have written horror, sci-fi, fantasy. As long as it has a thriller suspense element to it.
Yeah, it is amazing what a big bucket that the thriller is. It really has a lot of different type of genres within the thriller, quote unquote, thriller category.
Yeah.
And so what interested you towards thrillers?
My father was a prolific reader. He only had one eye, and he would still read 2-3 books a night. He would go to the library and come home with a handful of books, and he'd go back the next day and get another handful of books. And so he got me interested in reading in general. And he liked a lot of things. He liked poetry, and he liked histories and things like that. But he really liked crime fiction. Get excited about crime fiction, and it just kind of rubbed off on me that way. My interest was initially science fiction. As a kid growing up, I was a big Star Trek geek, and then I liked the Star Wars movies, and and I love time travel, all that stuff. I was big into science fiction for a long time. And then my dad, when he got sick, he asked me to read to him some Nero Wolfe and some W.E.B. Griffith and things like that. And all of a sudden, I wasn't interested in science fiction anymore. I mean, I still like science fiction, but something about it just grabbed me and made me want to just be involved in thrillers. So I quit writing science fiction and started focusing more on thrillers at that time.
And so those are some of your early influences then, W.E.B. Griffith and those type of writers?
Yeah, W.E.B. Griffith, John D. MacDonald, Robert Parker, Chandler, just a lot of the classic writers that wrote in different kinds of genres, but they were all thriller. And then on my own, I found James Patterson, because my dad was never into Patterson, and Michael Crichton, and a bunch of other writers like that I started reading on my own. But my deepest love is for Rex Stout and the Nero Wolfe books. When I started reading those, I couldn't put them down. I read the whole series, like book to book to book. They're my all-time favorite.
So check those out. I haven't read those books.
Well, Nero Wolfe, Rex Stout wrote Nero Wolfe from the 1930s through the 1970s. So there's 40 years worth of mystery novels. What Rex Stout did was he took his favorite writer, Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes series, and he did what they call pastiche, where you take the elements of it and then you tweak those elements and you create something new from it. Like if you read the first Nero Wolfe book, somebody once said of the first Nero Wolfe book that it was like a fully formed family. And the reason for that is because everything he did was fully formed. It was already in the Conan Doyle books. So he just tweaked it. But he did it in such a way that it feels like a totally different animal. Like, for example, Sherlock Holmes was kind of a, I don't want to say sociopath, but he was kind of pathological in that way. Rex Stout tweaked that and made Nero Wolfe a misogynist. So he hates women, just hates women, which is not something that was true of Sherlock Holmes, but it's the same idea. Sherlock Holmes his house was a character in the book, and it was 222B Baker Street. Nero Wolfe's house is a brownstone in Manhattan, and it's like a character in the book. So everything that they had in the stories that were Sherlock Holmes got translated into one way or another into the Nero Wolfe story.
Now that you're doing all these, you're writing and podcasting and everything else, do you still find time to read? And do you still primarily read thrillers?
I do read some, not as much as I would like to. And I hate to say this because part of the reason that I don't read as much as I would like to is because I started doing reviews. And I would review other writers' books. And every once in a while, I'll get a book to read that excites me, and I'll read it, and it'll be like a new indie author, and it's great. But a lot of the indie authors, I find that their book doesn't live up to the hype when they sent me the request, and so it slows down my reading. Whereas if I was just picking my own stuff, I wouldn't feel obligated to finish a book I don't like. But because I'm reading it for somebody and writing a review, and I don't let the fact that I don't necessarily like it necessarily mean I'm going to give them a bad review. Because, like, for example, right now I've been reading for a long time. I'm trying to get through a book that you call it cyberpunk, and it's not a genre that I would normally read, and I'm not enjoying it. But I can tell it's good cyberpunk.
Yeah, exactly. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, that's one genre that I don't understand some of the genres either. But obviously, I'm not their target audience either. But I know that cyberpunk is very popular.
I like Stieg Larsson, so I figured I would like this, but it doesn't hold up.
Stieg Larsson, I read the first one. I haven't read the other two, but that first one was a lot more. The book was so popular that when I read it, I was surprised how brutal it was. Mm-hmm. I was expecting something a little fluffy because it was so popular, and when I read it, I was like, whoa. So, what inspired you to write your first book?
My first book, actually, the first thing I wrote, if you want to call it my first book, was when I was in high school. My dad came home from the library with a book. I had just read Catcher in the Rye. And my dad came home with this book, and he said, "You're going to love this book. It's so much like Catcher in the Rye, but it's better." And he gave me this book that no one's ever heard of. It's a very rare book, and if you get a chance to read it, I really recommend it. It's called The Quartzsite Trip. So I read The Quartzsite Trip, and I thought, well, this is just so good. I want to emulate this book. So I tried to write a book in the style of The Quartzsite Trip. And I'd also read a book called that he had suggested to me that was called something about Catholics. We were raised Catholic, so he thought this book would be funny and I would enjoy it, and it was really funny, and it was along the lines of A Christmas Story.
Yep.
The one that you see every year that they run every year.
Yeah.
That movie, which is based on a book called In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash. So this book was similar to that, and it was funny. But the two ideas of The Quartzsite Trip and this other book, this Catholic, do black patent leather shoes really reflect up? Was what it was called, and it was really funny. So these two books were like germinating in my head, and so I tried to write a novel about a priest who's losing his faith and make it funny and also intriguing, and it's a terrible book. It'll never see the light of day. So that was my first book, but I enjoyed writing it so much that I decided I would try again and again. And it was where, like, if somebody has like an interest in the piano or the guitar, they just practice and practice and practice until they get good at it. That's what I did with writing. I just practiced and practiced and practiced until I got good at it, because it was something that I had an interest in from the beginning, and so I just let it continue.
And where do you usually get your ideas for your stories?
A lot of times my ideas come from, I'll see a movie or I'll read a book or I'll hear a story on the news, and I'll think I know where the story's going, and then it doesn't go where I thought it was going, and then and I'll think, but that was a good story. So I'll write it. Other times I've actually got quite a few stories that I got from dreams, where I just woke up from a dream, and the story in the dream was compelling enough that I turned it into a story. Of course, like anybody's dreams, my dreams don't make any sense, but there's enough of a germ there to turn it into a story. Like the first mystery novel in my series came from a dream. I dreamt that I was visiting a priest, and he had this compact sitting on his desk, and he excused himself to go take a call or something. And I picked up the compact and I opened it up and I started like examining it, and he comes running into the room, panicked, telling me to put it down. It's anointing oil that he has poisoned, so that when he's doing last rites and he anoints people, he can put them out of their misery. And so
that was your dream?
Yeah, that was a dream. Yeah. And so I woke up and thought, that is a great idea for a book.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Is that Extreme Unction? Is that your first?
That's Extreme Unction.
That's the Lupa.
Yeah. Extreme Unction is the first novel in my mystery series, and Extreme Unction is the Catholic term, the Latin term for last rites.
Oh, I was raised Catholic too, and I had no idea.
Yeah, it means final oil.
Oh, okay.
Extreme Unction. So, but what I did with the book was I turned a character in the story, this priest. I made him very, the term unctuous.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I made him very unctuous, so that there's a double meaning.
Yeah, yeah. Good tie into the title, huh? And how many books do you have in that series?
Right now there are 5. I'm working on the 6th. Those books in that series are actually they're pastiche of Nero Wolfe. I took everything from the Nero Wolfe series and tweaked it and turned it into Lupa Schwartz and his biographer Cattleya Hoskin. Nero Wolfe, the name Nero Wolfe, for example, a Roman emperor, but in the books he's from Montenegro, and he says in the books that he wasn't named for a emperor, he was named for a mountain, and so he's saying that he was named for Montenegro. So Nero means black in the book, right? So Black Wolf would be his name, and so my character Lupa Schwartz, Lupa means she wolf, and Schwartz means black. So it's the same thing.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. I was wondering where you got that name from because it's very unique.
And then, like for example, like the houses, like I was saying, the houses in Sherlock Holmes and Nero Wolfe are characters. So I put him in a Queen Anne house at the top of a hill, and so I described the house a lot in the books and made it like a character. In the Nero Wolfe books, there's 4 people that live in the house. There's Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin, who's his like gopher, and then there's Fritz Brenner, the cook, and Theo Horseman, the person that helps him with his orchids because he collects orchids. And so I had 4 people living in my guy's house. Nero Wolfe's a misogynist, so my guy's a lady killer. I switched that around. I took that backwards. So all of the people that live in their house with him are women. So I took everything, all the ideas from the Nero Wolfe stories. I tweaked it and turned it into my own thing so that I was able to start with the same kind of fully formed. I didn't have to try and figure out what things were. They were already just like built in to the story, to the background.
And you said, and these take place in Pittsburgh?
These take place in Pittsburgh. They're all set in and around Pittsburgh. Some of them there's some stories that go to West Virginia and some stories that go to Ohio because it's set in the tri-state area there. Yeah, for the most part, the stories are set in Pittsburgh. And I went to Art Institute in Pittsburgh, so I'm familiar with the town. I lived there for a couple years, so I'm familiar with the layout and the problems with the traffic and all that stuff. So that all plays into the stories too.
Yeah, you find that it's when you're writing and you're familiar with the area, does that make the writing a little bit easier, or do you get kind of stressed out because you want to make sure it's accurate, or?
No, I actually find that it makes things easier because if I have tried writing before in like totally fictional towns, and I'm always worried when I do that I'm going to do something geographic and conflicting. So, like for example, I'll have water maybe coming like a creek somewhere, and then put a water treatment plant too close to downtown or whatever. I don't know. So, but if I'm dealing with an actual town, I don't have to worry about that. It's all set up.
I prefer to do that myself too. It'd be too hard to create a whole town from scratch.
Yeah, and you have to draw maps so that you don't get confused, and
Yeah, and kind of like what you said too, like the house and the city kind of becomes like an extra character in the book, so it makes it more compelling.
Yeah, I was a friend of mine, another writer, was being interviewed by somebody one time, and he mentioned that he had read one of my stories and that the town he had been to Pittsburgh before, and that he felt like he was there again. So apparently I captured it.
Oh, that's the best. Yeah, that's one of the best compliments you could get.
Yeah.
Do you find like television and like pop culture and things like that influence your writing, or do you try to avoid that?
Yeah, they definitely do.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be publishing my first noir collection. It's called 8 Tales of Noir. It's eight stories. 6 of them are short stories and 2 of them are novellas. And I'll be publishing that in November. And several of the stories were inspired by. I was watching Breaking Bad.
Great show.
And again, it would be something where I thought the story was going to go here, but it didn't go here. It went there. So I took my place where I thought it would go. So definitely, popular culture does influence me a lot. Another case. I was listening to an audiobook one time, and there was a story in the audiobook about a guy who kills a coworker and then takes him down the river to get rid of the body. When he throws the body into the river, he ties the body all up. And when he throws the body in the river, he didn't realize that he tied his shoe into the rope. And so he gets dragged down with the body. And but I'm listening to that story, and I thought that was a good story, but it could have gone much longer, and there's a better way to dispose of the body. That's the kind of stuff I'm thinking of as I'm writing it or as I'm hearing it. So I decided to write that story. So so I have a story about a guy trying to get rid of a, but that's a common theme. But it came about because I was listening to that story. So yeah, pop culture.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I never thought about that before. But if you're watching a movie or reading a book or something, and you think it should go that way, why not write it down and maybe take it in that direction? That's pretty cool.
Exactly. One of my stories. Have you seen a Walk Amongst the Tombstones?
Oh yes, love that. I love the book and I enjoyed the movie as well.
Okay, so you remember, hopefully the audience is familiar enough with it that this will make sense to them. There's a scene in the movie, and spoiler alert if you haven't, there's a scene where he meets kidnappers face to face to do an exchange.
Right.
In the middle of the cemetery. The way that he gets them to meet him, I thought was genius. But then once he gets them there, he blows like a perfect opportunity, but it leads to the conclusion in the story. But I thought that there were things that he could have done in the cemetery to win right then and there. And so I wrote a story based on that. I don't set it in the cemetery, so it's not the same story at all. Basically, mine's about a story about a guy that gets a call that his wife has been kidnapped, and so he convinces the kidnappers that instead of doing a drop, he wants to do a face-to-face exchange, and then he sets up this elaborate way to do the exchange, and it helps him to get his wife back and kill the kidnappers. So that's one of the stories. But yeah, that came from watching A Walk Amongst the Tombstones.
What are the challenges that you find when you're writing? You do a lot of research. Do you ever have like writer's block? What are some of your challenges?
Yeah, I do a lot of research depending on the story. Like that story that I just was mentioning, the kidnapper story. You're on keyboards and I'm on keyboards. For anybody who doesn't know what keyboards is, it's a writer's. Well, it's for Kindle, but there's a special section of keyboards that's just writers, where we all just get together and talk craft and stuff. I couldn't figure out how to build a bomb that I needed to build for it, and so I did a post on there, and I got all kind of valuable information from people on that. When I wrote Extreme Unction, I had to come up with a poison to use. I needed a specific poison, and there were like certain qualities that I wanted from the poison. So I did a lot of research, and I finally came up with this insecticide called chlordane that was banned in the mid-70s because it was causing old people and children who came in contact with it to go into convulsions. So it was perfect for me.
That's the one.
Yeah, but I had to research the heck out of it in order to find it.
A writer's computer searches could probably get us in a lot of trouble if out of context.
Oh yeah. One of my stories involves bounty hunter who is taking a pedophile into jail that he's bringing him back because he's a bail jumper, and it's about a conversation that they're having in the car on the way, and so I have the pedophile making excuses for himself, and so I had to do, because I'm not a pedophile, I had to do all this research to find out what would make a pedophile think it's okay to do what he does. And so he goes on this, he gives the history of the age of consent and how in certain cultures it's this and in other cultures it's. So I had to look all that up. So it looks like I'm looking up like for a visit to Thailand or something.
Yeah, you might want to clear the cache of your computer on that one. What's a day for you when you're getting down to write?
Well, I don't write every day. I'm not one of those people who feels like I have a lot of books out, but that's because I just recently started publishing, and I've been writing them for 15, 20 years. So I don't write every day. It looks like I do because I come out with a book every 6 months. But a lot of these are books that I've already written that I'm just, once I get one out, then I start vetting the other one. I start sending it to beta readers, and I start sending it to reviewers and get ARCs out and so on. So I have to do all that pre-stuff. So it looks like I'm coming out with a book every couple of months. But these are books that I've been writing for years. A typical writing day when I'm actually writing, because I do write every day in one way or another, but a lot of it is either blog posts or just like an elaborate comment on Facebook, stuff like that. But I consider that all craft,
It's all practicing, right? You're writing, so it's all practice.
Yeah. But when I actually am writing, because a lot of my stuff is so research intensive, I'll have like 4 or 5 windows open on the computer and my Word file, and I'll wait until everybody in the house is asleep because I don't like to write when there's the possibility that anybody needs to talk to me. So I wait till everybody's asleep, and then I'll sit down and just start writing for 2 or 3 hours, and that time goes fast. All of a sudden, it'll be 3 o'clock in the morning. I didn't realize it was that late, but yeah, so I can pound out like 3,000 to 4,000 words. Now, I did do a couple of novels for NaNoWriMo, and when I did those, what I did was I spent a couple of months leading up to, in case anybody's not aware of that, we should probably clarify what that is. National Novel Writing Month is November, and there's a website where a bunch of authors get together and kind of support each other for November to write a novel. And you want to write 50,000 words in November is the goal. So, but what I'll do is for the months leading up to that, I'll do all my research and outlining. And then I figure out how many words I need to write every day. And so some days I'll write over that target so that it gives me a day off. Yeah, so that's how I do NaNoWriMo, and I've done it twice. I won't be doing it again for a while.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, you did it this year? No.
No, I'm not doing it this year. Yeah, so that's how I write though. That's my like a lot of time when I'm writing a novel normally, I'll write a couple thousand words, and then I won't write anything for several days, because one thing that I find is that going back and reading over what I've written helps me. If I write something and then the next day I pick up where I left off, I find it kind of disjointed. But if I write it and then walk away from it and come back and read it and then start writing again from where I was, I'm almost reading it fresh, because I'm not remembering exactly what I wrote, so I'm getting a new feel for it, and I'm getting back into that vibe, and I'm able to go on from there. But if I try to write without reading what I've written, then I always feel like it's almost like somebody else writing the next part of the story. I've lost the flow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're getting in the zone.
Yeah, I get in it's a different zone every time.
So what are you working on now? Are you writing the same series? Are you working on other?
The noir book that I'm putting out, 6 of the stories in it were episodes of my podcast, and so I wrote those. I wasn't sure if I was going to get enough submissions for the podcast, but the podcast is me reading other writers and my short fiction, and it's all thrillers. It's called the Thriller and Mystery Podcast. I wasn't sure if I was going to get enough submissions, so I wrote 6 stories for it, and so now, and then I had 2 other older stories, 2 novellas that were also noir. They're all the stories are noir, and so I'm putting out this book in November that's called Eight Tales of Noir. I'm still working on the podcast. I'm trying to come up with new ideas for stories for the podcast to fill holes. At the same time, I'm writing the 6th book in my mystery series. Which, when I came up with the idea for the mystery series, I had ideas. I immediately came up with ideas for 5 books, and then nothing. So I'm now writing the 6th book, which is where I'm out of ideas. The first story that I'm writing now. I actually did write the first story in there. I wrote the first story in there is called Testify, and it's available for free on my website if you want to read that first story for the 6th novel that's coming out. When the novel actually comes out, it won't be available for free on the website anymore. So for now, if anybody goes to my website, which you can get to through tinyurl.com/lupa landing, LUPA landing.
One word.
Yeah, you'll see a block in the right hand. What do they call that?
The sidebar.
Panel on the side.
Yeah, sidebar.
Yeah. There's a sidebar picture and a link to Testify. So the whole novella, 12 chapters, is available for free, and that's going to be the first story in the 6th novel. Because the 6th novel is actually going to be 3 novellas, which is something that Nero Wolfe, Rex Stout used to do with Nero Wolfe. He used to write novels and collections of novellas. So there would be, like, Troubles in Triplicate is a Nero Wolfe novel, but it's actually 3 novellas. So I've carried on that tradition. The 3rd novel in my series, which is called Fair Play, is actually 3 novellas. And then the 6th novel is going to be 3 novellas. And then if I continue with the series, the 9th novel will be 3 novellas. And then so there's going to be like 2 novels, novella, two novels and then three novellas, and then two novels and then three novellas. That's where I am right now. So I'm writing that. I'm in the middle of the second story, which came from an idea from a friend of mine. It's about something that actually happened to somebody, and that's as far as I can say without opening myself up to possible legal action.
All right, you don't want to do that.
And then the third story in there is going to be based around one of the peripheral characters in the novel. It's not actually going to be a story featuring my detective. And the reason I do that is because Rex Stout did that too. He had a detective Kramer in all the Nero Wolfe stories is always being defeated by Nero Wolfe. He's going to solve the crime, but Nero Wolfe gets it first. And so Rex Stout was getting a lot of criticism from the police. So for having this, dumb cop. And so he actually wrote a novel for Kramer, where Kramer solves the mystery. And it's not a very popular novel. It's not a very good novel.
So Kramer got his day,
he did that, I decided I would do that, and I would have peripheral characters have their own stories.
Your podcast sounds so fascinating because it's very unique. You're actually then, like you mentioned earlier, you actually are reading other authors' stories, your own stories. Can you tell us a little bit more about your podcast?
Well, the way that came about was born of failure. I had an idea for a website where writers would submit a third of a story, and readers would look over the story and say, I like this about it, but I don't like this about it, and this and that and that. And then the author would have a chance to fix the story based on what they had read so far, and then submit 2/3 of the story into a contest to get into an anthology. And then the stories that the readers like, the 9 or 10 stories that the readers liked the best, would go into an anthology, the whole story. So it would basically be they would read a third of it as a reader. A reader would read a third of it and say, why don't you fix this and this and this? And then they would come back and they would say, oh, well, here's a little bit bigger piece of it. Oh, I like this. I want to see where this one goes. I don't really care where this one's going. And then they would vote for the ones that they wanted to see finished, and the ones that got the most votes would go into an anthology. So it was basically the idea was it was a way for readers to find new writers and writers to find new readers. But it just died on the vine. Nobody was interested. I couldn't get readers to come to the site. I couldn't get writers to submit to the site. I had already registered the domain. Yeah. And so I didn't want to just waste it. So podcasting was something that I had decided I wanted to get into. And I was going to, and there are all kind of writing related podcasts. And I didn't want to do what everybody else was doing, where I talked about craft or where, not that what you're doing is bad, but I didn't want to be just interviewing other authors all the time. Although I do interview authors on my podcast, and I find it interesting, and I think readers find it interesting. I just didn't want to do whatever I wanted. I wanted to do something that nobody else was doing. And so I came up with this idea. I actually stole this idea. I'm not going to lie. I stole the idea from Podiobooks. There was a writer on Podiobooks who years ago, when Podiobooks first started, had great success on Podiobooks, and he came up with an idea. His name's I can't think of his name right now. I can think of the podcast. The podcast is called Crime Wave, WAV, like a
the wave file, yeah.
Yeah, but he doesn't do it anymore. He quit doing it. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to submit to him, and so I started looking up a way to submit to him. I couldn't find a way to submit to him, so I thought, well, if nobody's doing it anymore, I'll do it.
Yeah. You picked up the torch, yeah.
I picked up the torch, and now I'm running with it. But so that's how that came about. The idea has been very successful. The podcast has gotten me in contact with a lot of other writers. I've tried to do other things with the podcast to help, because my whole idea with the podcast is it helps me, but it helps them too. It gets an audience for people that don't have an audience, or that have an audience but could always use more. And the idea was the same with the original idea with the anthology. The idea was always, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I'll you bring your readers to the site, and they'll meet new people. Mm-hmm. They'll meet new writers, and then because there's nobody has to be greedy with their readers. There's always room for everybody. So that was the idea, and that part of it's worked beautifully. But I've also tried to do things like I thought a good idea would be to start a newsletter that when you come to the website to listen to the podcast, you can sign up for the newsletter. And if you sign up for the newsletter, then whenever one of the other writers is doing something like has a new release coming out, or has been interviewed on a podcast like yours, for example, or has a guest post on somebody's blog or anything like that that they want to promote, that they, or if they're doing a public appearance, that I can put that in the newsletter, and readers then who or listeners who have a favorite writer, they can follow their career through the newsletter. But nobody is signing up for the newsletter. I'm getting thousands and thousands of people downloading the podcast every day, and they've heard about the newsletter through the podcast, and nobody wants to sign up for it. So you never know what's going to be popular and what's not going to be popular. I'm just lucky that the podcast has been as popular as it is.
It's such a unique idea.
Really, I wanted it to be another. There was another podcast that I thought was interesting, was the Fogland podcast.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah.
It's like Kidwords people did that, I thought, yeah.
Right. And one of the stories that I wrote for my podcast was actually a story that I wrote for the Fogland podcast, and I submitted it to them, and I waited months and months and never heard back. So apparently that just withered on the vine and went away, and they're not doing it anymore. So I rewrote that story and turned it into one of the episodes of my podcast.
At least you're always finding ways to repurpose your stories if necessary. So that's
yeah.
Yeah.
And any other writers out there who are listening to this that want to submit a story to the podcast, it's thrillsandmystery.com. You just go to there and click on the podcast link, and you'll see all the podcasts there. If you want to listen to a few, get an idea of whether or not you're appropriate for it. You can also go to submissions.thrillsandmystery.com and read up on what the submission guidelines are. But it's really, I make it as simple as I can for anybody. If you have a short piece, and if it's a little bit long, we can serialize it. We can do it in 2 or 3 segments. And if it's too short, you can submit 2 or 3 pieces and make one episode. So I try to make that as simple as possible. And if you want to read it yourself, that's fine. If you have a friend that's a narrator and you want to get them to read it, that's fine. Or if all else fails, I'll read it. I read most of them, and I try to do it with voices and music. I add music into it. The music is all through incompetech.com. Website where all the music is written by a guy named Kevin MacLeod, and it's all free license, royalty free. Yeah, it's all royalty free music. So, yeah. But the podcast has been a lot of fun. It's starting to overwhelm me though, because I'm scheduling for season 3 right now. I'm in the middle of season 2, and there's like 10 weeks left of season 2, and then there'll be a little break, and then there'll be 20 weeks of season 3. So I'm exactly halfway through to the end of season 3 now, because I got all of season 1, which was 20 episodes, half of season 2, which is going to be 20 episodes, and then I still have a whole halfway to go. So when I look backwards at where it started and realize I have just exactly that far to go, I realize how much time I am investing in this thing. So after season 3, there will still be a podcast, but it will no longer be weekly, and there will no longer be seasons. It's going to be monthly, and it's just going to be one episode every month.
Yeah, it seems like it'll be easier for you to manage too, especially if you're doing most of the reading. Because that was the one thing that kind of stopped me, because I could read my own story and make it interesting. So that's kind of cool that you offer the option that you'll read it and make it interesting and add music and all that cool stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of theater experience too. I did stand-up comedy for a while, and I've been in local theater a lot, and I've made some commercials and stuff. So I understand the dramatic reading. How it works and everything. A little bit of a repertoire of characters. Although if a story has too many female characters,
it kind of challenging.
I start giving them accents.
That actually would be a pretty good place for somebody who wants to be an audiobook narrator or is trying to break into that business. It'd be a good way to build up their portfolio on your podcast.
Yeah. If there's somebody out there wanting to become a narrator, contact me, and I'll let you read one of these stories.
Yeah, there you go. All right, and for everyone listening, if you're listening to this on my website, I will have links to all this stuff on there too. So.
I have a Twitter. I have 2 Twitters. I have Gamut Man, which is a name that I use everywhere. My books all say all the paperback versions of them and the ebook have an imprint in them that says The Gamut, and I'm Gamut Man everywhere. So like Tumblr and Every place I'm Gamut Man on all these websites. But I do have a personal Facebook. But there's a Facebook for the Lupus Schwartz series. My personal Facebook, I don't accept people unless I know who they are. Mm-hmm. So I don't really have an author like that, but website like that. But I do have my book series does have a Facebook page, and I post on there every once in a while, and people can contact me through it. And then there's like Twitter is Gamut Man. There's also TNM Podcast at TNM Podcast on Twitter, which is for the podcast. And writers, if you're a writer and you have a Twitter account and you friend TNM Podcast, and it says that you're a writer on your page, TNM Podcast will friend you back. And then anytime that you post something that is promotional, send me a message and let me know, and I'll hype it. I'll promote it back. So my whole point, everything that I do, with the blog, which is Lupus Schwartz Mysteries.blogspot.com. Everything I do through the blog and for the podcast and everything, I try, and Twitter, I try to promote other indie writers as much as possible. I believe in giving back that way as much as possible, because I know I need people to help me.
Well, I want to thank you very much then, Dave, for coming on the show, sharing about your books and your podcast. It was nice talking to you.
Thanks. Nice talking to you too, Alan.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Meet the Thriller Author. You can visit our site at get.thrillingreads.com/podcast for more information on our podcasts. And you can also subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcatcher, like iTunes, the most popular one, of course. Just search for Meet the Thriller Author and you'll find me there. And I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/Meet Thriller Author. Love to hear from you. Love to hear your comments and your feedbacks on the shows. And I'll have a new podcast, new interview with a thriller author. I'll be posting them every Tuesday, so stay tuned for that. And don't forget to subscribe. And please visit my author website at alanpeterson.com.